always follows the path of least resistance. Some stormwater seeps into the ground, but most of it runs off into rivers and lakes. Along the way, erosion shapes the landscape. Now, enter the humans.
Water is the ultimate magnet. It picks up anything and everything along its course.
What we spray and spread, discharge from our factories, toss out as trash, even pour down our drains, finds its way into the water.
Just 1 foot of lead pipe has enough lead in it to contaminate every drop of water a family of 4 would use for 100 years.
They're putting lead, arsenic, mercury, selenium in the river every single day.
Next, cut down trees that served as buffers to keep trash and pollutants at bay. Add climate change, affecting the frequency and intensity of storms. Cover the ground with solid surfaces, and the water runs even faster, causing sewage overflow and floods.
We can't have these big thriving industries if we go home to polluted waters in our backyard.
Water, and everything in it, will find its way down, through forests and cities, and eventually to the sea.
I don't think this is a story about any one particular person. The star of this story is the river.
Will Pennsylvania serve as a clean water model for the rest of the country? Or will it settle for being a cautionary tale? That all depends on what we send downstream.
Downstream is made possible by the Heinz Endowments.
In Pennsylvania, a lot of people would probably think that our most abundant natural resource is natural gas or coal or lumber, but I would argue that it is most certainly water.
Pennsylvania has more miles of streams and rivers than any other state except Alaska. Over 83,000 miles of them. But the water is threatened by development and pollution, aging infrastructure, the remains of coal mining's past, and the uncertain future of environmental policies.
There are some streams in Pennsylvania that are completely void of life. They'll have a pH more similar to lemon juice than a typical stream.
More than 4,000 miles of Pennsylvania waters are effectively dead. No fish, no insects, no life at all.
Are you looking at the side channel or?
To protect and restore streams, Trout Unlimited relies on help from a surprising source.
Brook trout are like the canary in the coal mine.
That's because they thrive in only the coldest, cleanest water.
Their environment can also be degraded very slightly, and it can cause a large impact in the population.
Anything from temperature change to industry, agriculture, and development could upset the brook trout's ecosystem.
We are seeing a lot of these old legacy mines spilling out and causing typically acidity that makes the water toxic to all aquatic life.
Fewer than 1/3 of Pennsylvania's water have trout that naturally reproduce in the wild. Many streams need to be stocked with trout raised in fisheries.
There are some streams that you approach and they don't have the right smell. They almost smell sterile.
Cold water streams that do support wild trout are entitled to a higher level of legal protection.
Time is definitely of the essence when it comes to assessing these streams. We can't protect something if we don't know that it exists.
This is a carefully regulated process called electrofishing. It doesn't harm the fish, just stuns it briefly so it's easier to net.
Oh, got him. Trout, length 117.
What they find here provides clues to what's in the water.
I have a young of the year, like a trout that was definitely hatched this year. Very cute, very cool, very good to see. I get way more excited about little trout than big trout. So that is this year's brook trout.
Other creatures netted in the process give clues to a healthy food chain.
Yeah, crunchy and delicious for the trout.
Length 107.
After data's been collected, they're all released unharmed.
Even if you're not a very avid fisherman and you don't have a soft place in your heart for trout, you should care about this resource because the impacts of losing our trout population is a signal that there are impairments happening in our watersheds.
The more polluted the water gets up here, the more costly it is to clean once it flows downstream to you.
Whether it's your tax dollars or your utility bills, those economic impacts are being turned back on the consumers. A lot of times, all it takes is a little bit of education and maybe, a little bit of inspiration to get people on board with keeping our streams clean. Something that I can't help but think about is that I will likely be the only human that many of these animals will ever see. Knowing that those wild and natural places still exist is something that I find really inspiring and just makes me excited to get up to go to work every day.
No matter where you live, you're in a watershed.
A watershed is an area of land that feeds all of the water running under it, falling in it, and draining off of it into a common body of water.
Everybody has a watershed address, if you will, and everybody should be interested in what's going on in their watershed.
That's because watersheds support so many human activities and wildlife habitats. Pennsylvania has 6 major watersheds, fed by all of the states that surround it.
You're right now in the Little Conemaugh watershed, which is part of the bigger Kiski-Conemaugh watershed, which ultimately drains to the Pittsburgh area and the Ohio watersheds.
From there, it flows into the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, and after that, the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Pennsylvania's other watersheds run into various rivers, bays, and Great Lakes until they flow into the Atlantic Ocean too.
We strongly feel that it's our responsibility to try to give that water to them as cleanly as it can be. The overall goal is to improve the worst of the worst and protect the best of Pennsylvania's water resources.
The best of the best is beautiful, but what does the worst of the worst look like? Let's just say fresh flowing water should not be orange.
Water, to me, is the ultimate magnet. It kind of picks up anything and everything along its course.
And it's picking up more than just modern-day pollution. All 6 of the state's watersheds are haunted by the ghosts of mining's past. The environmental effects of coal mining weren't regulated in the United States until 1977. Prior to that, mining companies finished a job and walked away. When water fills the shafts today, it sweeps toxins into the water and even private wells.
So in that can be iron, sulfates, manganese, magnesium, aluminum, and other heavy metals that can be toxic, primarily to fish life.
Most of the drainage is acidic, caused by an iron mixture that turns water orange when it's exposed to oxygen. Drainage could also be contaminated by alkaline or other metal materials that turn the water white or bluish-green.
The state of Pennsylvania leads the nation with the most abandoned mine land problems. If you look at 67 counties in the state, there's 43 of them that have abandoned mine land problems.
Like this toxic pile looming over the homes in Ehrenfeld in Cambria County.
What you are seeing behind me now is the Ehrenfeld Dangerous Refuse Pile and Embankment area.
Spoil piles, like this, are another legacy of mining's past. Excavated land left to sit on top of the earth.
The spoil is anything and everything, rocks, topsoil, clay, sand, you name it.
3.2 million tons of anything and everything, washing into nearby water.
You had over 200 years of mining that was being done without any real environmental concern and safety concern.
The Ehrenfeld story is one of being forgotten, and I think a lot of the residents thought that that was their lot in life. It was a legacy. They didn't necessarily create the problem, but they didn't necessarily see the problem going away.
That changed in April of 2016. Government agencies, conservation groups, and Rosebud Mining Company came together to remove the spoil pile and restore the land.
That pile is still there. Yeah, well this is...
So I think that's the perfect example of how legacy issues can be dealt with modern day permitting to achieve the goal.
The top of this hill shows something Ehrenfeld residents haven't seen here in a century: grass and trees, growing on newly restored land. And all of these improvements will benefit the watershed.
They still got
It's a good news story. We are a Good Samaritan organization. We deal with private property owners. Everyday Joes out here that bought property and didn't realize that they own 50 acres, and on their 50 acres they have abandoned mine features. Since our program began after 1977, we have reclaimed over 25,000 acres of AML.
Visiting reclamation sites for me is probably one of the greatest joys of the job. To see how a community's perception changes over time, and I really get the feeling that there's a new sense of community pride.
Downriver of Ehrenfeld, in the Pittsburgh Pool, abandoned mine drainage is still a problem.
That was a mine for sure, huh?
But so is modern-day industrial pollution. Rob Walters is the executive director of Three Rivers Waterkeeper. Waterkeepers work worldwide to hold polluters accountable.
We would like for them to be good neighbors for the whole region and whole community, because their impact is so large.
Rob's on the water year-round, looking for environmental threats and policy violations. There's no lack of that, especially given the reputation of the Ohio River.
It is the most polluted river in the United States of America, continually rated year after year after year because of what it drains. And it is all industrial all the way down. Yeah, a lot of old cracked rebar.
He collects pictures, records, and water samples, then shares his evidence with government agencies to help them enforce existing laws.
I think watchdog, yeah, but really the way we look at it is if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about.
He also works with a team of lawyers. They pursue litigation if necessary.
They're putting lead, arsenic, mercury, selenium in the river every single day. This river is owned by the citizens of this community, of this state, and of this country. This is our river.
But the balance shifts when citizens don't take a stand against industrial polluters.
They then own that stretch of river. They're the ones that own that river because they're the ones that are polluting it, and they're making it the way they want it. Not the way you want it, but the way they want it. You're talking about your air you breathe. They own the air you breathe. They own the water you're in. But if you can get more people that are educated and passionate about these rivers, the better off the rivers are going to be. They then, when they go to the voting booth, they can make that decision for themselves. Unfortunately, water is not quite the recognized resource that it needs to be at the moment, and that's really scary. And I don't know whether in my lifetime or maybe my nieces or nephews' lifetime, but I think water is going to probably be worth more than gold.
Climate change and drought are drying out parts of the country. Other communities failed to plan ahead, so they'll have enough clean water for their growing populations and economy.
You can have shale, you can have natural gas, you can have coal, you can have all of those things, but eventually, you can sell water too, and you can sell water to other places that need water. We have such an amazing resource in this state, and we have such an opportunity to protect it so that we become a powerhouse in water.
None of that's possible if pollution persists.
As you can see, it's not a super clean process. You can see the conveyor belt that's now taking the coal up into that pile.
Coal has the potential to harm the water as it's moved and processed.
The coal obviously slips and slides off the conveyor belt. All the ground is black all the way down to the riverfront. If it rains, it falls right into the river.
Once it's in the river, it has long-term impacts due to leaching and immediate threats from chemical additives in the coal.
You'll see as the crane moves back and forth, Not every drop of coal goes into that bucket. Some of it spills and falls off to the side.
Not all pollution is caused by carelessness or ignoring the law. Some comes from industrial accidents, like when 15 coal barges broke loose at this site on the Mon in late May of 2018.
Unfortunately, during that process, 2 of them went down.
The barges that went down had 3,000 tons of coal on them, and there's no plan to recover it.
So you see all the black? That's all from the spill when the barges went down.
But not every trip along the river reveals bad news. This visit to a concrete company near McKees Rocks tells a success story.
In the past, this facility was just a complete straight riverbank going down. Along the edges would be direct runoff right into the river. As soon as it would rain, you could just see black coming down the sides of the riverbank.
Sedimentation, loose sand, clay, concrete, and rocks settle on the riverbed, clogging and contaminating the water. Three Rivers waterkeeper took photos showing continuous violations at this company, and the EPA used them to hold the company accountable. Today, its new owners are much more conscientious.
So they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing now. You can make money off of it, and you can also be environmentally responsible. So cheers to those guys. In the end, that will be the defining moment if Pittsburgh can clean its air and its water while it's in the process of rebuilding its economy. And it's through policy, and it's through change, and it's through getting people in government that understand the balance between industry and jobs and prosperity, and the environment and jobs and prosperity. The conversation's happening. More people need to be involved in the conversation, and that's really what it comes down to.
Another challenge facing the rivers is an excess of nutrients. They're a natural part of the ecosystem, but human activity is adding more. Nutrient pollution can cause an explosion of toxic algae growth, among other problems. And one way these nutrients enter the water is through sewage carrying untreated human waste.
I grew up in Florida, so we always swam outside. I moved to Pittsburgh. I'd say, oh, I want to swim in the river, and they'll say, well, there's sewer water in the river. I thought, well, that's terrible. That can't be true.
But it is true. Pittsburgh still relies on a combined sewer system. That means stormwater, raw sewage, and other waste collect in the same pipes on the way to the treatment plants. When the system gets overloaded, it all ends up in the water. It's called combined sewage overflow, and 9 billion gallons of it pour into Pittsburgh's water each year.
This is A58, one of our sewers here in Pittsburgh. Right now it's closed, so there's no problem. But if it was open, I would not be standing here.
The city's water treatment plant is the Allegheny County Sanitary Authority, or ALCASAN. It cleans the water, then releases it back into the river. But ALCASAN says as little as 1/10 of an inch of rain can overload their system. That might be why people are surprised to see someone swimming in the river. There's just something about the thought of human waste in the water.
I'm not saying that it's no big deal. It just doesn't hang around. When I go into the river, it's never the same river twice. So that river can be disgusting on Tuesday and beautiful on Thursday. It's not a closed system. I think one of my biggest concerns about being out here swimming in the open is that someone without the information will just try and get in. So I thought, why don't I take this body of knowledge and put it into a blog?
Her social media accounts are called Open Water Pittsburgh, and they provide updates about river conditions. She even makes posts from the water.
Usually when there's something polluting the waterways, you hate that thing. But with ALCASAN, they're not the villain here. And I feel like they're doing the best they can with the situation at hand.
ALCASAN has been under a federal consent decree to fix the problem since 2008. Its website outlines a plan to make upgrades over the next decade, but the cost totals more than $2 billion. Customers will cover that price tag with increased rates.
It's sort of like we all pay for the schools, even if you don't have kids in schools. And taking care of the environment is the same way. You personally may not be using this river, but having a good river benefits the entire community. Just so beautiful out here. I just love it. Even though our rivers aren't perfect, we have problems, you can still get in and enjoy the rivers, and I wish more people knew that.
Pittsburgh's overflowing sewage isn't the only problem caused by aging infrastructure. The other issue could be summed up in a single word: lead.
The first thing to recognize in the context of lead is it's a great science and public health success story. We banned lead in gas. We've controlled it in food and paint. In many ways, the story of environmental lead it's never been better.
The story takes a sad turn when it comes to the legacy of lead pipes. They were installed in public water lines in private homes decades ago.
Pittsburgh, they're in a situation that's similar to other cities around the country. The economic reality is that we don't have money to deal with all these problems.
And that is a crisis, because no amount of lead is safe. An early exposure can cause lifelong learning disabilities.
So this is just a foot of lead pipe, and if you held it, you'd see how heavy it is. But just 1 foot of lead pipe has enough lead in it to contaminate every drop of water a family of 4 would use for 100 years. Like, you will never run out of lead. Can you imagine like having 50 feet of this? It's like drinking through a 50-foot lead straw.
Documents from the Centers for Disease Control revealed that in some Allegheny County neighborhoods, half of all the children tested showed high levels of lead. The areas affected were almost all low-income neighborhoods.
Bottled water sales are skyrocketing in this country, and many of those who are paying that price are those who can at least afford to pay for it.
But other regions are at risk too. The Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority showed alarmingly high levels of lead in tap water samples taken in 2016. Edwards said those lead levels were even higher than levels in Flint, Michigan. And Mark Edwards knows all about the water crisis in Flint. He's the environmental engineer who exposed it. And he testified before Congress with his findings.
Directly endangering children in this country that have caused children to be lead poisoned. We were witnessing a crime. We exposed the crime. People are being indicted as we speak. People are going to jail.
Flint and Pittsburgh have lead in their water for different reasons. Flint didn't clean its water source properly. Pittsburgh's problems are related to aging infrastructure. But when Pittsburgh's water crisis came to light, Edwards came to Pittsburgh.
When they started becoming honest about the problem and they admitted they had a lead problem, there was a backlash against them. But I went to actually support the newfound honesty.
But it's still struggling with the financial and logistical challenge of how to replace old lead lines on public and private property.
I'm hopeful Pittsburgh is setting a path that others can follow.
But Edwards has devoted his career to studying water quality. And lead isn't the only contaminant that worries him.
We also have to realize that life is a grand human experiment, and we're always screwing things up. It's our own bad habits, applying fertilizers to lawns that gets into rivers and lakes. It's everything from pharmaceuticals that get into water supply, pesticides, herbicides, and even something we thought was innocuous as road salt, increasing chloride levels.
Add to that nutrient pollution, sedimentation, abandoned mine drainage, and the effects of urbanization. And that leaves Pennsylvania with 83,000 miles of endangered waterways.
There's also the downstream problems.
Downstream, all the way to the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania doesn't border the Chesapeake Bay, but more than half of the state sits in its watershed. The Susquehanna River is the largest contributor of fresh water to the bay. Thanks to what flowed in with it, 80% of the tidal waters here are partially or fully impaired by toxins.
The impacts on our estuaries and bays is really most profound because they're seeing the most concentrated effects, and it's also where the greatest density of wildlife lives. The Chesapeake ecosystem is really under siege from the perspective of the entire food web. The food web is very important. The lower creatures support the higher creatures. There are long-term consequences of ignoring the ecosystem that will directly impact us, will alter life as we know it on this planet. I think it's the interconnectedness of all things.
Interconnected. Because unless your home sits on the highest mountaintop, you live downstream of someone, and someone else lives downstream of you.
This is what environmental engineers do. Try our best to protect humankind from itself. It's something we all play a role in, and we're all going to have to be part of the solution. And your only hope is that you'll catch these problems before they do us all in, and that's a worthy goal.
Downstream is made possible by the Heinz Endowments.